So I thought I would, and this is a really good lead-in also to what I had planned, although I probably would have changed it a little bit too if I knew. So this is my first paper, scientific, official paper, published in 1992, based upon like 2 years of work as an undergraduate and as a lab technician. I'm very proud of this work. I love putting it on, like when NSF asks you for relevant publications, digging this out from 1992 and putting it on. And it has 48 citations, almost all of them by co-authors of the paper. But I'm still very proud of it. And it, came up when I was first in graduate school. And I can reference it in all sorts of ways on my CV, in the UC Davis publication record. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of curatorial activity related to DNA sequence analysis, building databases of sequences and protein families and curating them and making them available on the web. You can't even find my old website anymore because Stanford killed it as soon as you left, but you can dig it out of the Internet Archive. So the last record of it is in 1998. I don't have the original versions from 1993 and 1994. This website and the curatorial activities that I did are referenced far more than my paper. In fact, it got me all sorts of recognition, many different authors. Like this is a quote from a paper by a very well-known scientist at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Institute, where he wrote basically 3 pages of his paper was about my website. I just found this actually about a month ago. I never knew that he did this. I became a, curatorial expert for this big database called SwissProt, and yet there's nowhere to put this on my CV, basically. And there's nowhere in, to recognize this contribution. The website's completely gone. I mean, I kept, the HTML for it, but it's basically, and I've reposted it now on my blog. There's a link to old websites. But I just think it's, relevant to this discussion. I've always, even as a graduate student, I'm glad that I didn't think about academia and how you get credit for things, because I wouldn't have done this. And yet it is the basis for most of my career. It's how I got recognized. It's how I got, involved in genomics. And I worked at with Craig Venter for 8 years before coming here. And that type of activity is how I got my first job. And yet it doesn't show up in the record, even though, again, there probably are more references to these websites in the published literature than to that paper. And they're not tracked. It's very hard to find them. They're not all, kept in the same way. There's no simple referencing system for them. So anyway, in that context, I've never really thought about how to get credit, and I think that's good. So I went to this meeting in 2006 at Google, and there was all sorts of exciting stuff there, and I thought, God, I've got to share this with people. I've got to, write about this. And I had registered a blog site where I'd posted one blog that said, hey, this is blogging or something like that. And this is a year later, but I had the blog and I just started writing. And it's worked out pretty well. I was just going to say, I just added this in the back. So I also contributed to all the old news groups, Bionet news groups, and that's also how I got invited to conferences and things. And it's also hard. I wrote whole 3-page essays about, curating different information on those Bionet news groups. Anyway, so I started this blog in 2006. I now have 50,000 plus hits per month. I have 3,000 subscribers. I have everybody in the field knows what I'm doing because of my blog. I don't have to go travel to meetings because people find out. All my colleagues send me their new papers because they want me to write about their stuff in the blog. And yet, even with this, there's still no way to easily get credit for this work. And I just find this perplexing, I guess. It's not that I've stopped other activities. I still publish papers. I still contribute to the standard scholarly activities. I also contribute to a lot of different blogs now. We're trying to get one going for the communication project with Mario and Mackenzie and Allison. I have a whole project that I'll tell you about in a second that's mostly about curatorial activities and scholarly communication. We haven't talked about it yet, but I also spend a lot of time on Twitter. I think it's a very interesting medium for scholarly communication. like with blogging, like with writing scientific papers, you can do stupid things on Twitter, you can do stupid things in blogs, you can do stupid things in papers, but you can also do really interesting things. And in fact, my Twitter activity has gotten more referenced than that original paper. My tweets and blogs are referenced in Nature and the New York Times and Science and many other places. And again, nobody tracks this. I mean, I track it, of course, because we all like to give ourselves credit for things, but there's no system to go and find out, like Science Citations tracks references to all of my published literature. It doesn't track this very well, especially since there's no uniformity for how people reference these activities. And so, again, it's not that the intellectual contribution of a tweet is the same thing as the intellectual contribution of a book. But it would be nice to track this different activity. And there's lots of published literature and blogs and tweets about this issue. There's lots of great ideas for how to do this out in the field. But again, there's a whole collection of interesting publications and interesting blog posts and interesting other activities about how we could give scholarly credit and whether or not we should give scholarly credit to blogging and other types of activities. And yet, again, if you go, for example, now all the committees are saying we're going to use Google Scholar as a simple way to track citations to people, so we're going to go look up when you come up for tenure or merit, your hits in Google Scholar. There's no way to shove a blog post, even if it has 1,000 references, easily into Google Scholar, and they don't track it in any obvious way. And yet, again, that 1992 paper with 45 references gets cited actively in a lot of ways. And I assume every other institution is starting to have, some form of this. UC Davis has this relatively nice system to track your scholarly contributions with books and journal articles and talks and other things, and yet there's no category for really social media posts. And there's, again, no obvious way to track that, and that's why I wanted to come here. I assume many people know that there's also been this rise of what's called altmetrics. Altmetrics is, in theory, trying to develop ways to track alternative contributions. But what I found with altmetrics is really that altmetrics is in part about tracking references in alternative forms of media to established forms of media. So at this, there's a site called Total Impact that's run by some of the people who wrote this altmetrics manifesto, and they do a great job of tracking Twitter references to your scholarly publications. They do a great job of tracking even other types of references to your scholarly publications. They don't do anything at all about helping you track references to your social media type discussions. So there's nowhere inside this sort of box to make it easy to because they designed all these great scraping activities to go through Facebook and Twitter and other social media activities to count the references to papers with DOIs and with other web links, and to count the references to some forms of alternative media, like if you have a YouTube channel, they'll count that. But I still haven't been able to figure out how to get them to accurately track the hits that I'm getting to blog posts, or even the references. I mean, there's even the references in scholarly publications to my blog posts don't get tracked via these systems. Now, I thought I would just post this here. This is a review that I got of a grant proposal that said that I'm the only person on the team with the expertise to do this, but I spend way too much time blogging to contribute to this scientific effort. I have not included here, I wrote a draft response to this that I was going to post publicly. I had to black out about half of it. I then wrote a new draft response that I still had to black out about half of it, and I never posted the response to this grant review. But in general, there's this, there's both the people that do this that like to promote it as it should count in some way, and there's a whole colony of people who say that, this shouldn't count. And I just thought I'd mention gave a talk at this TED Med meeting, which eventually got picked up by TED. It has 500,000 or so views, at least. I get more contacts by funding agencies and by collaborators and by students from that than from any other thing I have done in my career. I spent 6 months working on that talk. I mean, I spent more developing that than any other project I've probably been involved in. And yet there is no way to really, in the academic world, get established credit for doing this. And sure, there's all this great, many TED Talks are completely insipid, so, I totally understand that there's criticism of this general activity, but I crafted this talk like I would craft, essay about the field, and I spent months working on it. And yet, so I'm actually writing up literally the text from my talk. I'm going to publish that somewhere, even on my blog, and it will get more credit than the talk itself via the community. And again, that just seems awkward at best. And I just thought, I didn't want to go on for too long because I thought the discussion is really important. I just thought I would end with, despite all of this, despite all of the lack of official credit for these activities, I don't stop doing it. I think it's really important and interesting work. And in fact, it's been more helpful to my career than anything else I do. So we have a grant in my lab that's now on its second round. It's been a total of about $2.5 million from the Sloan Foundation that all relates to curating and collecting and archiving information and social media type activities in my field. And they came to me because of my blog to ask me to apply for this grant. And the new grant that we have with Mario and Mackenzie is also unquestionably evolved from my social media and other activities.
Maybe we got the grant.
Yeah, well, and 5 of the last 10 people that have come to my lab, I have become aware of or have contacted me solely because of my social media activity. Sarah Hurd's a postdoc. She also does a blog. She just got one of these amazing Chancellor postdoctoral fellowships that were just announced. Holly Bick, very active in social media, just got a faculty job. 2 grad students, another postdoc. They're all, this has enriched my lab and my career beyond anything. And yet I still don't have a way when I come up for these merit and promotion activities or when I apply for NIH and NSF grants, there's almost no way to describe this activity or to get credit for it in some useful way. And I think that this is why I asked you the question. I don't want to get rid of the old system, and I don't want to tell students that they should do these things if they're not going to get credit for it in some way. It's fine for me as a full professor with tenure to screw around with whatever I want to do. But we need to give sort of guidance to the new people in the field in some way and to change the system so that people get credit for doing interesting stuff in whatever format it is in, rather than saying you have to have your monograph published by some entity or you have to have, well, I'll just give you another example. I have a split appointment in evolution ecology and medical microbiology and immunology in the medical school. In medical microbiology and immunology, there are discussions of who has gotten or is applying for an NIH R01 grant. There are no discussions of any other funding agency as existing in any way. So if you get an R01 grant, that's amazing. I've brought in more money than almost the rest of the department's R01 grants via Sloan, Moore, DARPA, DHS, DOE, et cetera. They don't get credit. They're not counted at all in the, so they use R01 grants like many departments use Nature and Science papers or impact factor. And so it's not just scholarly contributions where people are doing this. It's in general this surrogates of quality as opposed to quality of work, which I think is the problem. That's what we discussed at this meeting that we had a few months ago. And I think that the more we can move away from surrogates of quality being the issue and into just assessing quality wherever it comes from, I think that that is the solution here, and getting the deans and administrators on board is essential because the departments are probably not going to do this without some push. And that's it. So. And of course, I'm live tweeting the meeting in the back of the room.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. I guess a couple of questions. I mean, I'm now tripping over the word credit because it strikes me you've got very large grants, you've got people coming to your lab, you've built a career.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not bad in terms of a typical academic career. This is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you are getting credit.
Yeah.
You're getting massive credit for this work.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that it's not picked up necessarily by P&T committees is another question, an interesting question.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to...
Absolutely. Completely dead on. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. The other one I wanted to ask about was, I've thought myself about, as many folks have, about, kind of getting away from surrogates to actually measuring quality. That involves reading.
Yeah, of course.
And we do not have a readership that's capable of actually judging everything that's being written, in scholarly publications, let alone through blogs, tweets, and all the rest of the web. Can you suggest some kind of mechanism where we could get beyond surrogates?
Yeah,
I think it's more a case of pick your surrogate.
I think you're probably right. I mean, so I'll give you one example of a good case study where someone has tried to get away from surrogates, where it has worked, but it's a very narrow area. Yeah. And then I'll say something about alternatives to the current surrogates. So Harold Varmus, who was head of the NIH, so my brother was one of the co-founders of the Public Library of Science with Harold Varmus and Pat Brown, and so I've heard a lot about these activities. Harold Varmus, after he left NIH, went to Memorial Sloan Kettering and was the president of Memorial Sloan Kettering. And one of the things he tried to implement there was getting away from impact factor of journals as the metric for hiring and promotion activities, so that you didn't just look for whether or not people published in Nature, Science, and Cell, basically, which are the highest impact journals in biomedicine, or in what they were doing. And what he found that they had to do, basically, was, in essence, require committees to read the papers that were published by the people being evaluated. They were evaluating. And because it was a narrow area, it seems like it worked okay. Although, even with that, they had to basically promise extra administrative support for committees because now they were going to be doing more work. And it took, unfortunately, he's now left Memorial Sloan Kettering to not necessarily see this through to the end because he's now the head of the National Cancer Institute. But it sounds like they were starting to get a change in the culture such that people liked this more because they felt like they were going to get evaluated by their quality of their work, so that they were willing to put this in. But you're absolutely right that the narrowness of their evaluation made it such that they could attempt to do this. And so altmetrics has been proposed as the alternative surrogate, alternative surrogate to the current surrogates that are used for quality. And I'm not sure that it is, I think it's potentially better, but I'm not sure that it is a necessarily wiser option. But I completely agree that with broad type activities, there's just no way, even if people read this stuff, that the ability to assess it is going to be challenging. And I do not know a solution to your question. I think it's a very important question, and we need to figure it out. But I think the current surrogates are really bad. And I would like to replace them with alternative surrogates at the least, if not with actual better assessment.
There was Tim.
I was actually going to propose exactly what you said. Universities have to actually compensate faculty to do the reading.
Yeah.
Maybe one addition to two additions. The other one is that the higher personnel committees have to be structured with people who are open to these alternatives. So I But I think the other thing that has to happen is that there has to be room for the surrogates. But if you're doing a lot of reading, you can actually make sense of the surrogates. If you don't do the reading, the surrogates make no sense. And if they become proxies, that's why.
And everything can be gamed, so you have to be able to.
Exactly. But I think so. I was on a personnel committee for 2 years. I actually became department chair partly to escape the third year because I was reading.
Yeah.
And I nearly went mad.
I've never heard of department chairs escape before.
No, but this is a huge issue. I mean.
Yes, but so I think it really requires faculty demand that the administration spend the money to make actual review of content.
Yeah, and we need to change. I mean, so there's been this effort here to try and change the timing of some of the merit review process because it's burdensome the way it is now. And this is what at our meeting that we organized, the chancellor of UC Davis, Linda Katehi, came and basically said, which I think is an interesting model, that for tenure review, they basically very few rejections of cases for tenure, and most of the rejections of cases for tenure she overruled as being potentially biased in some way. And so she said, why don't we just give everyone tenure and not burden people with this massive review. I mean, she wasn't completely serious about all the proposal, but we had this big discussion of the fact that we go through these merit reviews every 2 to 3 years for many faculty and other members of the academic sort of Senate hierarchy, which includes thousands of project scientists and professional researchers. And so in 1 year, I'm supposed to review about 70 cases and vote on them. It's just ridiculous. And there's no support for that. And so in the end, it's not even based upon surrogate metrics. It's based upon just voting yes and getting out of the way. And so I think that we need to figure out exactly how to get the administration to say, we want people to do this, and we will provide the support for doing it. At this level and at grant review and at every place where people get reviewed. And obviously, some places are better able to do this than others. And I've found, for example, the private foundations have been much more accepting of alternative forms of scholarly communication than the federal agencies.
Tim, and then Becca.
Yeah, I was just going to push back a little bit from the humanities perspective on the metrics drawing. I mean, they're really different communities, and also it has to do with my own experiences. I'm not in the UC system, which I think is probably the most organized system nationally in terms of the regularity and the complexity of merit. But generally speaking, one of the things that my faculty has been doing in response to the curiosity of the new dean about the valence of metrics is precisely trying to push back and say, no, we have a history of reading people's work.
Yep.
The work will be read, it will be evaluated, and it's up to you to pay attention to the readings of the faculty and the review committees and the outside referees pertaining to the quality and the importance of this work outside of the metrics. And I think it's a real slippery slope that we're on, because it's totally understandable why within the scientific community alt metrics and the need to revise metrics is happening because of the restructuring of the university in which those models are becoming more and more recommended as central for all participants in the university. It's encroaching on the discursive flexibility of the humanities in ways that we haven't even been able to imagine. So it's just kind of a...
But I think the stories that I've heard about Harold Varmus's experience has been that it would potentially be better in the sciences too to do what you're saying. So I think actually the sciences can learn a lot from the pushback that's coming from the humanities to this, rather than embracing altmetrics as the solution to everything, to try and have it be a little component of a tool as opposed to the answer.
It's really good to know about this, actually.
So back there, and then Mackenzie.
So if we take a bird's eye view, so what I'm seeing is there's this idea of metrics, and there's so many different aspects to this knowledge production ecosystem. So if you look at the tech side and the production of data that was discussed in the previous meeting, the new levels of data and technology, the discipline side, how our disciplines are changing. And for instance, I'll just give one. I just got an email from someone who found my research on my blog, my dissertation. It's fun, you know, it's someone in the medical field. I'm in the humanities, and you know, as I try to build bridges for my particular knowledge area amongst disciplines, technology is like this huge, amazing thing that can kind of fuel that, especially the internet. We have the management side in the institution, the social media side, the grant and funding side. So it seems to me like the more you can map out how all those aspects are interrelating and visualize that and to show that to more groups. There's the open access issue. There's so many different sides to it that things are changing, and in different fields and departments we don't understand that. So I think the more mapping and sharing of how all the inner issues are interrelated in terms of, like, you know, literal structures, and you know, I think will really help, because then it can catch more people up to speed, and then the rhetoric issues can then be, I think, better handled, especially by the administration and the corporate, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, this goes back to your point about what credit is and getting credit. And I think what I've seen from this bird's eye view of being involved in journals and other activities is that we're wasting a lot of effort in the community trying to jam things into an existing system that seems unessential. So for example, I've been involved in generating massive genomic sequence data sets for years. That's what I do. My research is on DNA sequencing and producing data and curating it and releasing it to the community. And historically, the way most people who did this got credit was we'd spend 3 years working on the genome sequence of some organism. We would write a compendium paper, largely boring, that basically said, this is everything we found in the data set. And then people who use the data reference that paper, even though they don't read the paper, and they probably shouldn't read the papers in many cases. But if they use the data, they would reference that paper. And if you posted data to the data archives like GenBank, which you were required to do, but didn't quite catch up to writing the paper, even if tens of thousands of people used your data, you got no reference for that. And so what has happened in the community is this move towards publishing completely inane data papers with nothing in them but a description of how the data was generated. And that, people cite them. So they don't cite the database entry, but if you have a journal title with it and a DOI, they get cited. So I've been running this project called the Genomic Encyclopedia of Bacteria and Archaea at the Department of Energy Joint Genome Institute, and we're sequencing thousands of genomes of different bacteria. And we're publishing these mini data report papers in this new journal that was created basically just for this, called Standards in Genome Sciences. I'm getting thousands of total citations for those papers. When we've done this previously, none, 0. And so those papers are borderline useless. I mean, literally. And yet, everybody is doing this because we feel like we have to get credit in this system, and it's an incredible waste of time and effort. And that's the part that I know that we're getting credit for many of these things. I know that I just want, as a community, to figure out a way not to keep trying to force things into an existing system just because of the means by which we get credit for them. And that's the part that really most concerns me. And then the merit and review and other things are clearly another big area of concern. But we waste so much time on these things. It's just drives me crazy.
Mackenzie Smith, and for those who don't know Mackenzie, she's the co-conspirator with Jonathan and I in this 3-year innovating academic scholarship publishing initiative. Mackenzie.
I want to thank Jonathan for saving us 15 minutes because you just gave my talk on data papers.
Yeah.
But, coming back to kind of the administration's point of view on all of this, I think a couple of points. Your comment about Linda Katehi's recommendation that we do away with tenure is telling, because it seems to me like academics are doing this to themselves. You know, and I'm thinking about my colleagues at Cornell Library who finally cracked down and said, okay, for promotion and tenure cases for librarians, we're going to limit you to 3 papers,
Yeah.
or something that people could actually read. When we tried to do that here, they pushed back.
Yeah.
Said, no, we want to include everything we've ever written.
My merit package is like 45
Yeah.
pages long.
And
I mean,
the
it's
review
just
committees
deranged.
are saying enough already,
Yeah.
but the academics are saying no. So I know you're going to respond, but so is there some way we could kind of, could the administration help? I doubt it, in an academic summit kind of context that we have. Say, okay, can we streamline this process to the things that really matter, and then force everybody to read it?
I think it
So
would be
that's-
better to come from the bottom than the top in
I
that
do
case.
too. I do too. It should start with the people who
Yeah.
are producing the stuff. And the other point is, instead of alt metrics, could we think about alt credit? Because I'm one of the people who hires a lot of the alt academics.
Yeah.
Who would have liked to have a traditional career, but they're doing stuff that's so different that they end up working for the library.
Yep.
And they're very happy doing that. But so could we stop forcing everybody to think of promotion and tenure as the be-all and end-all?
Yeah.
Like you said, you didn't get tenure because of all the stuff the tenure committees
Yeah.
look at